Stuck inside my mind in this quarantine house. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't in sight. Where do I go to find someone to talk to about all of my flaws? You can never validate me, tell me the lies. I searched but to nothing to find there and missed online. Instead I'm anxious and depressed and my coping skills are not fine. We were to fit and it felt like a waste of time. I heard an interview and I felt an instant connection. I learned CMHIMP, DVD and mindfulness skills and teaching every session. I'm pulling through, ready to ask the next question. The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a donation to the podcast via Venmo to the username @NQCATX. NextQuest Podcast is sponsored by Karen's Therapy and Nutrition. Karen's Therapy and Nutrition, specializing in EMDR therapy for the treatment of trauma, food, weight, and body concerns, now offering virtual and in-person sessions. Visit www.cairns, that's CAIRNS, therapy, THERAPY.com for more information or to schedule a consultation today. Hello and welcome to NextQuest Podcast, where I ask your potential therapist questions so you don't have to. I am your host, Noah S. Garcia, licensed professional counselor supervisor. Today, I welcome to the show Cyndi Collen, licensed clinical social worker supervisor and certified mental health integrative medicine provider. We'll be talking about her practice in an area of specialty, integrative psychotherapy. Welcome to the show, Cyndi.
Hi, welcome. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Thanks for agreeing to be on. I'm really excited about learning more about this. So tell us, what are your credentials and experience?
Well, I'm a clinical social worker licensed here in the state of Texas and in the state of Colorado. I am also a Texas board-approved supervisor, a certified mental health integrative medicine practitioner, which means I've done extensive training on this whole gut-brain, culinary medicine, functional nutrition stuff. I'm also a certified Kundalini Yoga instructor.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I don't teach Kundalini Yoga in classes or anything, but I do bring a bunch of aspects about breath and meditation and even vagus nerve stuff into therapy. So that's kind of fun. And I have a mindfulness practice, and a lot of that came from Kundalini Yoga. So I don't know. I don't think I have a credential for mindfulness, but it's a big part of my life. Yeah.
So Kundalini, is that the one that focuses on the like ohms and like the like vocalizations and that sort of thing?
Yeah. There's a lot of mantra, a lot of breath work,
Right.
using your body to go into different angles. And it was so, I didn't know until later, until I started to do more gut brain stuff and polyvagal stuff and learn about the vagus nerve, that I was like, oh my, this Kundalini stuff that's several thousand years old was all about the autonomic nervous system and the vagus nerve. Like I was kind of maybe impressed with myself that I did this thing years earlier and it had exact application for what I do as a therapist. So
That's
it's
awesome.
kind of interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting. I think as a therapist, I think the longer we're in practice, the more like things seem to come together in a way. I don't know if that's been your experience.
Absolutely. You hit that on the nose. Yeah.
So in your practice, what is the name of your practice or the practice that you work at?
Okay. I own a group practice and it's called Flourish Psychotherapy and Nutrition.
Okay. And at Flourish, do you accept insurance? If so, which ones? If not, why not?
Well, I have, there are 6 therapists at Flourish and 1 nutritionist.
Awesome.
Currently, one of the therapists accepts Blue Cross Blue Shield, but she's got a full caseload, like many others in town, because I know that's a popular insurance panel. And I am looking to take on another one or two therapists that take that.
Awesome. That's really exciting. That sounds like a large group practice. Actually, 6 people is a good amount of people.
Yeah, I'm like almost in awe of it. Just like kind of happened, right? Like one minute it was just me, and I've got a caseload of 30 clients because I do a bunch of groups, so I have more clients in there. And then the next thing I know, I'm looking at my EHR software that shows me how many clients I have and how many sessions we've booked. And I'm like, oh my, we've got like almost 80 clients now.
Wow.
So that these last 6 months we've really seen a lot of growth. So that's a really good feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. So you personally don't accept insurance at the practice. Do you offer a sliding scale or reduced fee to clients?
I do not. As a therapist, I have a pretty full caseload, but I do have a couple of LMSWs that are with me, and they offer a sliding scale.
Okay. And do you have weekend or evening appointments, either yourself or any of your associates?
When you do this work, I have found that I work some evenings and I work 3 Saturdays a month. And then and the other therapist, that is a part of what we do. We try to be available for when folks are available. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Is being a therapist your first career? If not, what was?
I say to my clients when I go over informed consent, I say I have a bachelor's of social work and I have a master's of social work, but they're about 100 years apart. And or at least it feels that way. But after I graduated with a bachelor's of social work back when Ronald Reagan, was president there, and I was in the rock and roll business at the time, and I just was, I can't do this social work thing. And I enjoyed what I did. I was a counselor for teenage girls and loved it, but knew I couldn't do that. And so for the next 30 something years, I was in technology. And this is before smartphones. Like I was in technology before it was really a thing. So I've got that. And then I had this great opportunity for a second career, and thought back on those days as a bachelor of social work student and how much I loved that, and was able to go back to graduate school and now doing this thing. I had no idea, Noah, that I would love doing it as much as I do. Had no idea that I would find learning and researching and really getting into the sciencey stuff. I am not good at the science stuff. But I have just found it endlessly fascinating to learn more and more. So really, really excited to have this as a second career.
What drew you to getting your master's and becoming a therapist?
Well, I knew I wanted to do something different. I was a single mom for a long time. And once my son graduated from high school, I kept telling him, I'm going to do something different. And so I was looking at doing public policy at the time. But I had a family member go through a mental health crisis. And I had to do a lot. It was almost like I was the case manager in some ways. And then I had a friend, tell me, like, you're really good at this. Like you held it and you responded really well. I don't know a lot of people that could do what you did. And you might want to think about pursuing, this mental health stuff rather than this policy stuff. And my friend was spot on. So,
that's some good feedback.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little more about yourself. What are your hobbies, interests, TV shows you're watching, music you're listening to, pets, etc.?
Well, I got a lot going on here over at the house. I have a crew, or I had a crew of 3 pups. And one of my oldest pups, 16 and a half, I lost her last fall, but now I've got my 2 boys, Paco and Xander. They accompany me in therapy pretty regularly. Most of our clients at Flourish know them. They welcome them at the door, but they're older. So that gets a little So that's a lot of care, but I'm happy to do that with the older ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm pretty much, I work a lot running a small business and trying to grow it. Don't have a lot of free time and do
I
find
get that.
yeah, right. And especially what we do as therapists, like, it's a lot to hold, not only trying to, work with the other therapists and making sure that everybody's getting what they need, but then also for my own clients. And so I find that I'm drawn to things like whether it be music or even TV shows or movies that have stories, that have real characters, and something that I can kind of lose myself in their story so that I can kind of take my time to kind of ground whatever I'm holding with everything that I'm doing. I also do a lot of them. I have a lot of musculoskeletal challenges, and I've had many surgeries over the years. I have a spine that's not very kind to me, so I do an awful lot of physical therapy on my own, and yoga, and as we start to talk about it, this culinary medicine thing, this using food as medicine is a very big part of my life. So I spend an enormous amount of my time in my kitchen.
That makes a lot of sense. So just talking about you as a therapist, what modalities do you tend to draw upon?
That's a really good question. And what I have found is that I just went towards things that resonated with me, modalities. And so I first started off with all this mindfulness stuff in graduate school, and also self-compassion. I was super lucky to be at the University of Texas here in Austin. I mean, one of the professors there is Krista Neff, who literally is like the one who developed the whole construct of self-compassion and all the research and all that has to do with that. So that really influenced me early on. But as I had said to you, that I was doing the Kundalini thing before then. And so I really gravitated to more mindfulness, let's say, cognitive therapy, as well as acceptance and commitment therapy. So those were like really the grounding modalities that I first started off with. And then I got really drawn to attachment theory, or actually I had a supervisor who really encouraged me to explore that. And that was hard to do that, because my own attachment stuff was coming up as I was learning more about it, and was able to get through my own stuff. And I say, I am all about attachment. And what's wild is that attachment, mindfulness, and the Kundalini stuff, which I told you is very vagus nerve centric. And then I brought in a lot of polyvagal theory stuff, which is the interpersonal neurobiology. And they all ended up really fitting well together. So really what I do is that I just bring in modalities that all kind of fit in. And so, sometimes internal family systems is something that I bring in therapy as well.
Awesome. So in talking about, a whole body approach to mental health, how would you describe that? What is a whole body approach to mental health?
Well, what that to me means is that I say we, but me as a clinician, myself as a clinician, which now informs the practice of Flourish, is that looking at a client as a person, as a whole person, and not as a diagnosis, not as a label, not as a cluster of symptoms, and looking just to address those symptoms. When I look at them as a whole person, I mean, you can say that's holistic in a way. And so that whole body approach looks at, okay, you have these things that are happening within you. You have some behaviors, you have some maybe memories and experiences that either you don't, that are not fun for you, is how I try to say it, or that are showing up in different ways. You're maybe having challenges with relationships or job. Maybe there's chronic fatigue or panic attacks. But as you can see, all of these things that I'm naming, I will look at them through a lens that is always assessing, always looking for context, and always really looking at environmental, and that's internally in your body, environmental, right? Externally, systems, as well as just the present moment. So that to me is that whole body approach. We're just going to look at everything that's going on with you and not just zero in on your brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So you've mentioned interpersonal neurobiology a few times. What is interpersonal neurobiology, and how have you seen understanding and attention to this aid in the treatment of depression and anxiety?
Well, this interpersonal neurobiology to me and this is my version of it, right? Which is it's all about the autonomic nervous system and really understanding that we have messages going all over the body. There's the neuro piece of it, right? And these messages, when you get to understand how the brain responds to different messages that are being picked up by all of our senses, because again, we as human beings are always assessing what's happening externally, what's happening internally to kind of to gauge whether we're safe or not. And it's not a conscious thing of safety. It's more of an unconscious thing that we're doing. And so this interpersonal neurobiology is about how is your body responding to what's happening in the moment or what has happened in the past. So understanding what's going on underneath the hood and then bringing that into the room and having maybe the client start to slowly be more connected with their body and understand the messages that are coming up for them. Because these messages, when we understand how the brain and the body is reacting and or coping or not coping with something that's happening, they tend to get this bigger picture like, oh my God, my brain isn't broken. There's this real human stuff happening. This is kind of a response that's meant to protect me rather than to, have me make the wrong decision. Like, when we really start to understand how miraculous our bodies are at trying to protect us, making sure that we're surviving, and even giving us some signs that, hey, if you just do this thing over here, if you pay attention here, you might thrive.
Mm-hmm. And so for our listeners who aren't familiar, can you tell us what the autonomic nervous system is responsible for?
Sure. Well, I think that most people have heard of fight or flight, right? So when you think about fight or flight, it's like, oh crap. And maybe people have heard of, if you see a saber-toothed tiger so many years ago, your body will switch into a mode that allows you to flee, like run really hard, really fast, or fight. So you have strength to really fight. It's all about survival. So the autonomic nervous system has got, according to the polyvagal theory, has got 3 branches. And those 3 branches are really our survival and thriving branches. And so this wiring is meant to pick up a threat. Even if it's a tiny little threat, it's not very good. Our autonomic nervous system is not very good at figuring out, is this a big threat? Is this just a little one? In other words, your autonomic nervous system is wired to protect you. So whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or it's a whole bunch of notifications on your cell phone, your body's going to react in the same way about, oh crap, what's happening. And then the autonomic nervous system then engages with different other systems in the body to maybe put some organs and some systems at rest and then pump up some other systems so that you can survive as best that you can.
And is it my understanding? It's my understanding that things like trauma can help shape the way the autonomic nervous system responds.
Absolutely. Because when we have a trauma and a lot of, we can even look at trauma as it's a response. Something turns really traumatic if you are alone in it. And alone doesn't mean that you're the only one standing there. Alone could mean you could have people around you, but they aren't noticing that this is really hard for you. And so in that moment, your body can encode that experience as, this is not good, this is a threat, and you're alone. And when we feel that aloneness, the autonomic nervous system will go into oh crap mode. and maybe start shutting down for some people and start to put you in what is called a dorsal vagal state, which kind of your body's like, well, our chance of really getting out of this is not great. So we're just going to hang out. And I call it's like being a turtle, like the turtle going in the shell, and to be in protecting and kind of sticking their head out every now and then. Like, is it safe to come out? Are there people there that can help me? And so in this way, that trauma can be encoded so that when something else happens years later, like a certain sound, a certain facial expression that the body has encoded during that previous trauma, and then that could then kind of lead you going, oh, body knows how to respond to this. This is not good, and can put you back into that not great autonomic nervous system response.
So when you're working with folks who have anxiety and depression, how do you use interpersonal neurobiology to inform your work with that individual?
Well, it takes time. So how I work with clients is depending on where they are at. So it's not like everybody coming in with anxiety and depression. I just do it in this one way. But right. I do have handouts. we have props. And when we were in the office, what was really fun about that is that I have a bookshelf that is like a ladder. And when I did some trainings early on, there was the facilitator literally brought in a ladder and put the three branches of the autonomic nervous system on the ladder. And here I am, the trainer, going, I got a bookcase in my office that has that. So I started to put the branches up there and words associated with that, so that when a client is in my office and is getting in, maybe talking about something that happened or even what they're experiencing right then and there, we kind of try to slowly say, where are you on the ladder? Where are you right now? What are your tells? Because it's really hard sometimes to notice, like, I am engaged in sympathetic nervous system. I'm in fight or flight right now. So we kind of, let's say, work on your tells and noticing what's happening under the hood so that you can get more connected to what's happening to you and in you, right, in that moment, in order to understand your response, right, in a broader context, rather than, oh, I'm broken, I'll always react this way.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so now that we're doing the video thing, I have a ladder, a graphic that we use an awful lot. And then the other tool that we use a lot is the feelings wheel, because that can be hard when you're in a sympathetic or fight or flight response. Your body really is very only focused on survival. So it's really hard to connect to what you're really feeling. And so when we start to maybe slow down and take some breaths and use the feelings wheel as a prompt to say, am I feeling insignificant right now? Am I feeling inadequate? More than just sadness or happy, right? Or even rage, right? We just try to really pull it apart as a way to kind of get you connected to what's happening in your body.
Makes sense to me. How about functional medicine and nutrition? How do those help with anxiety and depression?
Well, that's, in so many different ways. That's a loaded question in a functional, right? Because everybody's different. And so, if you're in a lot of Facebook groups or whatever, and you see this thing like, what food should I eat that would help my anxiety? Like, what works for one person doesn't work for another. So that's the biggest thing about functional medicine or functional nutrition when it comes to anxiety and depression is, number one, understanding and getting to really assess and know each client and their own individual context and what's happening. But what lots of new research and even older research has shown is that the microbiome, which is our gut, which is actually our second brain, and the enteric nervous system, has enormous influence over our brain's functioning and our mood. And this, again, we're going into vagus nerve stuff, and hopefully we'll talk more about that. But so if we can tend to the microbiome and look at, say, I want to say dysbiosis. It's a fun word that means it's an imbalance of gut bacteria. but it's more complicated than that. So really what we're looking at when you're talking about functional medicine and functional nutrition is inflammation. And whether it's in the gut or maybe in other parts of the body, we really try to address some inflammation, decrease inflammatory foods, decrease inflammatory maybe toxins in your environment. And when the body is inflamed, the brain is going to be inflamed. These are the messages that are circulating through the nervous system and the immune system. They're very much connected, the immune system and nervous system. And so if what we try to do is that if we can kind of do our best for what we do in decreasing inflammation, we can't, we're not a medicine, we're not a medical practice yet. I'm hoping to add that as we go. But we do, let's say what Angela Nash, she's our functional nutritionist, and we try to do the low hanging fruit, trying to, manage inflammation from what you're eating and maybe your environment and some lifestyle things that maybe you're doing or not doing. And then if we find that somebody's not responding as well as they could, then we'll refer out to a functional medicine doctor. But combining those together about just only talk therapy, as well as looking at inflammation and how to address it, that's how we'll work with anxiety and depression in that whole body approach.
Can you give me some examples of foods that both increase and decrease inflammation? Just out of curiosity.
Sure. There's a whole lot of research that gluten is pretty inflammatory. And, and the newer research is really showing that it's maybe more about glyphosate, which is Roundup. That could be really what's more triggering for people. I don't think that this percentage of folks in the population that we have now that are sensitive to gluten. So it's not just about being a celiac, which means you introduce
Right.
gluten to somebody who's a celiac and their entire immune system, doesn't work well. But besides that, gluten sensitivity is a big thing and really interrupts the microbiome, because when we're not breaking it down, it's fermenting and it's causing, leaky gut, which then, creates all kinds of havoc for our immune system, which again co-ops the nervous system into stuff. So gluten can be really, really problematic. And I know that that's really hard for everyone to hear, especially for me.
I love it.
I know I'm half Italian, so it's like,
Yeah.
I would much rather have pasta than anything in the whole world. And of course, cookies and pies and things like that. And then other inflammatory foods that could be inflammatory for people. I mean, dairy is the other big one, because sometimes the body can look at a dairy protein and it thinks it's kind of gluten sometimes. So there's some crossover things there. Soy can be inflammatory. Sometimes eggs can be too. So again, it really depends on the person. And of course, what we're talking about here is that it may not be inflammatory their whole life. So
Right.
it depending on the state of inflammation that you're in, depending on your gut and where you're at, is that somebody might be inflamed by most foods that they're eating. So that's kind of a sign that we got to do some really big work here, because that's not something that should be happening.
Are there certain foods that actually work to decrease inflammation?
Well, we'll always say feed the microbiome. And
Mhm.
so fiber, which,
Right.
when folks are doing keto, that they don't want to hear about fiber, right? So, and Americans are famous, our diets are terrible. We are so low in fiber. And it, because of a lot of processed foods that we eat, and, high fat. So yeah, high, good fiber. And really what that comes from is a lot of vegetables and a little bit of fruit.
Right.
So that's what I'm not talking about, whole grains. And I'm not talking about, getting your cereal in the morning, your high fiber brand cereal. That's maybe not the best fiber for you. So yeah, fiber, 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 lots and lots of water. We like to say clean food. So looking at a food that doesn't have antibiotics in it or hormones or pesticides. So really looking at organic produce if possible, and grass-fed and meats and wild caught fish.
Okay, good to know. Tell me more about the gut-brain connection and about how this can influence mood, autonomic nervous system, and overall well-being.
This is a big question. I could talk for a long time on this, and actually Angela and I do a free webinar several times a year called the Food Mood Connection. Yeah, where we really talk about that. And so let's start when we think about the connection of the gut brain. Let's start with the enteric nervous system. Again, that's called the second brain. Remember, and so, but let's go back and think about the autonomic nervous system. Is that you've got these, those protectors, or let's say those sensors that are looking for danger in your environment to make sure that you're surviving, right? So our five senses are what do that for the autonomic nervous system, like what we're hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, feeling. That's all giving us data about, hey, is my environment safe? Is it not? So, but the second brain, the enteric nervous system, is actually scanning for threats in what's coming into you, right? So it's going to look at what you're eating and kind of do that judgy thing about, hey, are you a threat to me? Are you a foreign invader coming into the system? And if you are, I need to figure out how to get rid of you or how to lessen the damage here so we can survive. So that gut connection is looking and co-opting, all these other resources in your body to protect you. And what's happening also in the gut is that you got the vagus nerve that is in there. Now, mind you, the vagus nerve connects so many organs in our body, but it literally is the message system that connects the brain to the gut. And so what's happening in the gut, gives off messages that then go up and down the vagus nerve, the information superhighway, to inform the rest of the body about what's going on. And so this is kind of like a wild research fact to know, but most people, and you kind of think that the brain is in charge of the body, right? Brain, hey, what is it when people say, hey, I've got anxiety. So, I know that my stomach, it gets my stomach upset, or I get nauseous. Mm-hmm. It's because I'm anxious. And I might say, well, actually you're anxious because your stomach's upset. So right. So when we look at it that way, 80% of the information that's going to our body is coming from our gut. Only 20% of information that's traveling along that information superhighway is coming from the brain to the body. So when we look at it that way, that so many messages are coming from the gut and going up into the body and to the brain about what's happening, it's like, let's try to make that environment in our gut as healthy as possible so those messages can travel the way they're supposed to, and can kind of do their job in terms of balancing hormones and all of the other messaging systems in the body. And so we talk about how that connection is such that when you tend to the microbiome and you allow some of that messaging to be as healthy as it can be, then we would see that mood becomes more balanced. You have a sharper cognition, you're going to have more energy, and even just a greater capacity to even hold stress.
Mm-hmm. And isn't there a significant amount of serotonin in the stomach as well?
I've seen all different numbers, but anywhere between 80 to 95% of serotonin is made in the gut.
Right. So I can see how that is, significantly related to mood.
And which is, and then it's a little wild if you bring in, psychiatric medication, because it's targeting the brain and it's targeting and recycling or reuptaking, right? Serotonin. So it's kind of going in and hacking kind of the brain chemistry and, maybe not in a good way. right? But it's not addressing the gut. And so we'll do a lot of work with people that we have a lot of clients that end up working with their prescriber and start to taper off of psychiatric medications while we're working on gut and doing some other good stuff. And then they find that, if I just eat this way, right. I kind of don't need the medication. Now, it's not just eat this way. And I forgot to put sugar in there as an inflammatory.
Damn it.
Damn, right.
All the good stuff.
I'm telling you. It doesn't mean that you can't have the good stuff. I just want you to know, like, we can still be healthy. Right? Yes. And in moderation and watching it. And yeah.
I had a question come up while you were talking, and I don't know if you know anything about this, but you were talking about the autonomic nervous system being, related or relying, I suppose, on like our sensory stimuli. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder how people who are autistic are impacted by that specifically since, because of sensitivities to sensory stimuli. I just was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I don't work with that population, but there's an awful lot of practitioners here in town that, whether it be doctors and even there's a few therapists that, do have a whole body approach and do understand the impacts of what's happening, let's say nervous system wise, functional, even medicine wise, and autism.
Cool. Okay. So how can an integrative approach assist in getting to the quote root cause of depression and anxiety? And like, what does that process typically look like?
Well, when we think about root cause, I mean, we're looking at a whole bunch of things. So we're looking at your body, not only your gut, but also maybe there's stored traumas, experiences in your body of some kind. We also look at, I'm an attachment therapist, so I am always going to go back to family of origin and looking very early on in your childhood experiences. And so when we can do that and spend a lot of time together in therapy, whether it be an individual or group, we can start looking at root cause and kind of do some rewiring together in order to kind of not make the old stuff go away, but maybe just rewire you in a way that allows you to hold what's happening a little better, so that, you might still have feels of anxiety and depression, but maybe they're not so loud and so disruptive. But also what we find is that when you kind of combine that with a gut approach, that you might find that the anxiety at times can disappear, even though you've had some adverse childhood experiences. So, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So what are some examples of some integrative therapy tools you bring into session, and what prompts you to utilize those?
Well, it's all about where the client wants to go.
Sure.
That's really what it's all about. I have individuals and I do groups and I have this practice called Flourish Psychotherapy and Nutrition. And a lot of folks reach out to me when I first started and they reached out because I do the mindfulness stuff and, I don't like the labels and I have this holistic approach, and they kind of don't see the nutrition part in the, in the practice name. And so we're working together, and the longer that I'm seeing and that, if they're doing really good work and they're really committed to the process, which means that they're doing the work outside of the therapy room, like really doing some good reflecting and some challenging. And we build some mindful awareness, because that's key in anything that we're doing here, to really have this awareness about what's happening within you. And when I see them doing really good work, but they're still having some intense episodes and and that could be showing up in many places. That's when we might say, hey, let's have are you open to looking at the gut? I might even start with somebody before even doing any type of nutritional changes, or even lifestyle changes, saying, would you be open to some supplements, to some protocols for that? And I have a client who came to me with a very, had a traumatic experience, and they were in their very early 20s, and we did a lot of therapy, twice a week individually, and then once a week individually, and went into a group. And then about a year and a half later, though, she started to do really, really well. And I was like, gosh, this big thing, like what was the thing? Like, I'm just so impressed with how far you've come. And she said it was the vitamins. She calls them the vitamins. It was the supplements. So a year into our work together, before she really did any type of dietary changes, she had so much fatigue. And she kept on having like some infections that were popping up every now and then. So I just put together a supplement protocol, and it was maybe 5 or 6 things. Most of it was very gut centered, and then some other mineral report. And she had more energy. She was like, for the first time in I can remember, that I am not full of fatigue and just exhausted by 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm not just sitting on my phone, just scrolling endlessly for hours and hours. Like, I want to do things. And from there, she was able to do, make some food choices. And so see, it depends. Like, for some people, how we kind of get in there. But then there are some folks that are with me for a few years and know that this is what I do. And I might bring it up every now and then. And they were like, no, it can't be that. I've eaten this way my whole life. Why is it a problem now? And so we just try to gently kind of go in there to say, no, it's a little connected. Yeah.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned environmental toxins. So I'm curious, in what ways do environmental toxins impact our overall mental health? Overall health and mood. And what are some examples of environmental toxins?
Good question. Loaded question there.
I'm full of them today.
So one of the toxins that I named is glyphosate, which is Roundup. And so much research links it to so much damage in our bodies as a carcinogen for cancer. Monsanto, who I think was recently bought out by Bayer, which is a German, their German competitor, now their owner, they billions of dollars in lawsuits around cancer. But we also know that it totally affects brain functioning and very much linked to Alzheimer's and even dementia. So that's one really big toxin, and it is everywhere. I mean, there are infants being born with glyphosate, right? And because of what mom has ingested, and most of the time we don't know that we're around it. And even depends if you're in rural areas where it's very much, in the air and in the water, right? That's pretty much disruptive to, as I said, body and brain function. Other toxins, they can be those PFAS, which is those forever chemicals, PFAS, and that again is neurologically disruptive. Other toxins, mold, like here in Austin, we have an awful lot of mold, and I'm not talking the mold that makes you sneeze, the mold that's from the leaves. This is mold that's from water damage and moisture, right? So when I think about Austin, a lot of our AC systems, there's a lot of mold happening in there. Right. So in people's homes, that can, so the mold, and depending, again, this is all dependent on people's bodies. Some people are going to have a really hard time with glyphosate, some may not. Some may have a hard time with PFAS, other may not. And it depends really on genetically, on what your genetics are. And so genetics play a role in this epigenetic way, which means that just because you have a gene that says that you're predisposed to Alzheimer's doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. But if your environment expresses these genes in a poor way. And that environment means it may be that if you have a lot of glyphosate in your system, your genes are going to express themselves. That is going to make that more of a thing that could happen, right? So the same is true with something like mold, like depending on the person. I'm a type of person, I met with a genetics counselor years ago and did this really great work. Very thankful for it, but found out I'm not very good with mold.
Yeah, I'm highly allergic to mold.
Yeah. And so, and yeah, I'm allergic to it, but what happens is when it's not an allergy, it's like when I'm exposed to mold organisms, and they come in my body, it is very disruptive. I have a really hard time getting rid of it. And so those kind of things, I'll have quite often people come to me and there's a lot of fatigue, and the fatigue gets misdiagnosed as depression. So remember when we said that whole body approach to mental health, that really I do a lot of assessing. And even if I do the Beck depression inventory, and I won't find a whole lot of hopelessness there, but I'll find an awful lot of fatigue. And I'll say, I don't see major depressive disorder here. I see chronic fatigue that has been undiagnosed. And so through some time and maybe through some referrals too, we might kind of peel back, but more often than not, that the person has been exposed to mold, either currently where they're living or in the past. And it's still whether in them or even in some of their belongings from a past place where there was water damage. Right. And so we may even see that more now, actually, because of the storm that we had and busted pipes that happened in February. And people don't know how dangerous mold can be for certain people. You might have a household of 6 people, but one person might be the one that gets ill. And so because there may be in an environment where everybody's fine, and whether this is mold or maybe any other toxins like what we're talking about, is that a lot of times folks with mental health symptoms, it gets just dismissed, right? Like, oh, you're just crazy, or, oh, you just need to take an antidepressant, but when we find that maybe there's a toxin here that you've been exposed to that is creating this, then the problem never goes away just with a psychiatric medication.
Right.
And actually the problem can get worse over time because you're still exposed, but also some of the dismissiveness about folks around you can then make it worse because now you're feeling alone. I'm hopeless. I can't do anything. Yes, I am broken. So you're going into that dorsal vagal response that I was talking about earlier in the autonomic nervous system. Right. So it's kind of like sometimes these toxins can create a cycle of mental health stuff that feels like it will just never go away. And so by looking at toxins, looking at environment and trying to disrupt that cycle, we get some really good stuff at the end of that.
Makes a lot of sense. So regarding psychiatric medications, what are your thoughts and feelings on psychiatric medications? And at what point do you generally refer for psychiatric medications?
So I might give more of a controversial answer here.
Oh, please do.
Than what other people do. I'm not a fan of psychiatric medication. However, I do understand that it can play a role for some people, and a very, very important role. So I just want to make that clear. Let's say the role that it can play when somebody really is in a depression and there's maybe suicidal attempts, that can be really, or with anxiety, or even if it's delusions or hallucinations, like, those type of things, I can understand how some psychiatric medication is very, very necessary. But I do believe that psychiatric medication is meant for short-term use, not long-term use. And I don't know if you've ever read the book or heard of the book Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whittaker.
I haven't.
Oh, it changed my whole my whole view of psychiatric medication. And Robert Whittaker is a journalist, so he went after it as like an investigative reporter. He now has another book coming out around the pharmaceutical industry. But I heard about this book when I went to a conference in 2015, and it was about 1,000 psychotherapists there. And it was a lot of interpersonal neurobiology stuff. And one of the presenters very early on went up like, who has read Anatomy of Epidemic? And I felt like I was the only person in 1,000 people that didn't raise their hand. But the book
now
really,
I'm that person.
well, I mean, I go to Barton Springs a lot and do a lot of reading there. It's just my favorite place to be, and it's chill. And I read that book while I was there, and I found myself just tearing up a lot. There are a lot of research that shows that over time that a lot of psychiatric medications do more harm than good. So this is research that, is in a lot of other countries, maybe not here. But let's say when I look at it from just a different angle, a lot of times I have people that come in that are really struggling with depression or anxiety that is just so chronic and so interfering in their life, and they're on medications. And I'm saying, but if you're on medication and you're still struggling, why are you on the medication if it's not helping? Is there maybe other things that we can do? But they also come in with the belief that I am broken in some way and I need this medication. And without it, I would be a mess like I was before I took it. I was worse before I took it. And so what I have found is that when we just, you keep doing your psychiatric medication, let's keep on doing our therapy stuff. And when we start to maybe build some mindful awareness, when they start to really get into a therapeutic relationship with me, one with compassion and empathy, and they really feel me joining in them, they're able to then maybe start to process stuff and resolve stuff from a long time ago they haven't. And when they start to maybe feel a little stronger and have a little bit more capacity to take on what's happening around them, then we might start working on reducing the psychiatric medication. This is all under supervision from their prescriber. We find that they're able to get off of the medication and find a new benchmark for them, what it was like. And also this feeling like, I wasn't as broken as I thought. I didn't have this thing called depression that's going to be with me for the rest of my life.
Got it. Okay. What about some examples of other mental health concerns that an integrative approach can assist with?
Well, in insomnia can be a big one.
I can see that for sure.
Yeah. No, and so in insomnia, that was really, really hard and to kind of wrap around. It's just, and I guess to me that depression, and I don't mean to say this with glib, but depression from a gut brain or a whole body approach can sometimes be easier to work with. It doesn't maybe have as many root causes as something like anxiety does or insomnia. So those are the harder things to work with with an integrative approach. But in insomnia, we can do some good work on that.
Cool. Okay. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask about a whole body approach to mental health that you think would be good for people to know?
Well, over time, no, I have not been comfortable sharing my own story, but I'm developing a new website, and I've been encouraged by the folks that help me with social media marketing saying, Cyndi, you need to share more of your story. So
please tell us.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring that in because I think it is really what started me to bring a lot of this in, and maybe helps to shed some light about what this whole body approach can do. So I know that I mentioned that I have chronic illness, and it started in 2005 and hit me like a ton of bricks. Not really sure of the root cause, but there was a traumatic experience before then, and I'll name it here. I used to work in New York City, so it was in the World Trade Center on September 11th. That was not a fun day for me, but luckily was able to get out of there okay, but not okay, if that makes sense to you.
Totally.
Yeah. So, but after that, I had a lot of inflammation happening in my body. I had joints that were not doing well. I had started with knee problems, like I would fall down when I was walking, and I was 40 something years old, and I was in martial arts, and I was really trying to get my black belt. So I've always been active. So to have my body start to fall apart like this was a bit odd. And then after, I ended up having knee surgery in 2005, and one surgery went really well, another did not, in terms of recuperating. And that's when the fatigue started, the inflammation was all over. So it was probably a mixture of whether it be trauma and something happened in that procedure, as well as I was in a house that had mold in it and didn't know it for many years. So I kind of had a whole bunch of crappy stuff happen to me. Yeah. And so during that time, I mean, I had, health insurance. And so this was in like 2005, 2006. So, went through conventional medicine route. I got diagnosed of having depression, heavy depression. And that's why that, my back hurt, or, I was fatigued all the time. I mean, I was a single mom. I was an Energizer bunny. I was a single mom. I taught aerobics part-time just for fun. And I worked in New York City. I mean, I have a lot of energy. And so when it just left me, it's like, this doesn't feel like depression. Right. So I had some disability insurance, private disability, thank goodness. So I didn't lose my home, was able to stay there, but was on medications and went to so many doctors, and nobody could really help me. And this feeling of just exhaustion and hopelessness was just with me all the time. And I had always had anxiety, but now the anxiety I was having was just at a level that was awful. I was really just scared to leave my home, like not thinking I could, and I couldn't walk very well because my back was really a mess. And I couldn't walk very far. I couldn't stand, these things that I used to do, couldn't take care of myself. But when I moved back to Austin and started with functional medicine doctors, it was just easier to find people here and trying something new. Over time, working with so many people, and I was very, very lucky I had the resources to do this because none of this was covered under insurance. I started to feel better. And when I was in graduate school, it became very important to me to even feel better, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm loving what I'm doing. I really want to be able to work more than 10 hours a week, or really be able to do something consistently. And I did some big changes in my diet. I'd done changes before, but nothing this big. I completely eliminated grains for many months. And I noticed, just as a side effect, as I was doing some therapy with people, I had noticed that I had a trip that was coming up, and I didn't have panic attacks about it. I'm like, this is bizarre. Like, it just came out. Like, I noticed, like, I am packing for a trip and I'm still sleeping at night. I am not having panic and getting overwhelmed about what am I bringing, getting some frozen responses from that, like, kind of putting things off. I was going through the normal thing that I do preparing for a trip, and it felt easy. I was like, God, I've never had that before. And that's when I started, asking questions to my doctors at the time, like, what's happening here? And that's when we started to understand there's a real connection between what you're eating and having like this very low level of anxiety there. Yeah. And so that's what really started with me. And then when I worked with a genetics person and really understood how some of my crappy genetics were at play mental health wise. And literally what I found was, I take a lot of methylated B vitamins and in different forms. And all of a sudden I didn't have brain fog anymore, and I could think clearly, and I had more energy. So it really has been my personal experience. It informed, it doesn't mean that everything that happened to me, that I'm going to do that with clients. But I did just notice that if this worked for me, this whole body approach, then it could work for a whole lot of people that maybe weren't being helped in conventional medicine. Maybe they were having symptoms that weren't responding to treatment like mine were. And And I do know, again, I said, I'm not really great at some of the sciencey things. I have to work hard, really hard to know a lot. But bringing in other people into my practice that are much better at than I am has really helped, others, our clients, take that whole body approach to wellness. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's 9/11. That sounds awful. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Oh, thanks. But it woke me up. It woke me up. I was single mom working real hard and, just doing my thing as a commuter, doing the best I could, take care of my son, was not really paying attention to current events, had no idea who these people, the Taliban, were. I know now.
Yeah,
I know a lot more now. I'm more plugged in. It was a wake-up call for me. So in a way, it's kind of shaped who I am today. So I am kind of grateful, but it's kind of wild to think like, oh my God, I have all the millions of people in the country.
Yeah.
There were a few thousand of us there that day, and I was one of them. And that's bizarre. It also affected my son, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to think that, I had PTSD for a very, very long time. And this mindfulness stuff that I do, I couldn't be, that's what I'm saying. I'm kind of grateful. I wouldn't have found mindfulness. I mean, the first I started to feel really better about my whole body would go into stuff for 10 years, right? The week before September 11th, right? I would go into, an anxiety into stuff, but really into kind of a depression of sorts, very not present, very preoccupied. But when I started doing more Kundalini Yoga and meditation and a lot of breath work, that doesn't even happen to me anymore. It's like, oh God, I look at the calendar, I'll have some family reach out, like thinking about you today. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know what day it was today. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Sure. Turning the questions more so to you as a therapist, what kind of experience do you have working with particularly vulnerable clients, such as those who are transgender, undocumented, or BIPOC, to name a few examples?
Well, when I was in graduate school, I had an internship at a high school that had a lot of undocumented teenagers there. So I had a group with them. So gosh, that's when I first got familiar with DACA and helping them do some paperwork. So I have some experience as an intern, and this is my older intern. This is not one, a long time ago. And then I was at Capital Area Counseling here in town for about 4 years, and that they serve a pretty vulnerable population. So I have experience with that. But I want to say that we probably have more therapists at Flourish. We have a couple there that have more experience with this population than I do, and so that the group practice, we really tried to kind of hold everybody there. But because a lot of what we do is private pay, and even sliding scale, I don't know, like a $70, sliding scale is maybe not too great. I am on the board and founded a nonprofit here in town called the Mindful Wellness Center of Austin. And we do sessions at $30 to $50 a piece. They're telehealth at the moment. We are really trying to figure out how to do some fundraising and maybe look for some grants so we can have like $5 copays, right? So we can have like some scholarships for folks to pay for this. So what we really want to be able to do is bring this mindfulness stuff, this mindful approach to wellness to as many folks as we can.
Very cool. I love that. Please send me, do you have a website for that?
We do.
Can you email that to me and I'll include it in the show notes so people can find it?
Sure. Thanks.
Awesome. So, a lot of people, they make an appointment with a therapist. Sometimes it's weeks out. They spend the next few weeks really anxious about how this first session is going to go. So this question is designed to help reduce the anxiety somebody might have coming in to a first session. So what could a new client expect from an initial session with you? And what about more on an ongoing basis?
Well, for an initial session, for most clients, I'm not like this with everybody, but for most clients, I ask a lot of questions. And so I end up talking more especially the first session, than they're used to. So sometimes it makes it easier for them because they don't have to, really come and, hand me on a silver platter all of their stuff so I can, we can start our work, because I'm all about context. And so I need to know a lot before we get going. But there are some people that, we might need to jump in right away, depending on where they're at. But that still means that at some point I will be getting that context. So that first session, really, the first couple sessions are easy for them. I'm a little bit more directive at the beginning, and really working on just building this relationship between the two of us. Checking in a bunch. I'm very relational, and I'm also noticing what's happening. And so really wanting to do the best that I can to have them feel that I'm really hearing them and seeing them and getting to know them. And then over time, really just, if they can allow me to join them in with what they're experiencing and going through, that's where our real work comes from. And that's the stuff that we collaborate on, over our time together.
Okay, cool. Next question. I love this question. How would you say your clients describe or experience
you? Yeah, that's interesting, right? What my clients may say is that I'm with them, like they hear me all the time. What would Cyndi say, right? In what they're doing. So I can maybe take that to say that our connection together is real. I believe that they know that I care about them, and they know that I get them. I say that a lot, saying, I know you, I know this about you. And so really, really, I think what they would say is that I am connecting with them and just accept them for who they are and who they are not. And I am delighted in whatever they bring to me. And the big thing here is that I'm not going to judge. It's hard, Noah, not to judge, right? We're wired, right? Our biology is there to wire to judge. But I would think that that they would say that that's probably the biggest thing that they get from me. It's just openness and no judgment and warmth and compassion.
Okay. Next question has been a little controversial on the show previously. And I mean, of course, there is no right answer to this, right? Are you a therapist who will laugh or cry with your clients?
Controversial, really? Because I do both.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I think it's a very fine line to walk in terms of like ensuring that it's not about us, right? And that we're not bringing our stuff into session. But I do find that there are moments that are just where I just feel really touched, and I might tear up, and and I think that that's a result of being connective, like, and it feels like that's a lot different than like crying it and making it about yourself in that moment. You know?
Totally. When you do your own work as a therapist, right? That you can notice your stuff and kind of, to me, put it on a shelf. Oh, there's okay, I don't need that right now. But when you're really connecting with someone, and especially if you've known them for a while, but they share something very, very tender, and you are really with them, you're really empathetic. And, our mirror neurons are gonna, if they're experiencing that in a hard way, I'm gonna feel that. And I'll even also feel that if they're sharing something beautiful with me,
right?
Whether it's like an epiphany they had, or just a really, they've been struggling with something and they were able to do something they didn't think they could do, I'm going to have tears of joy. but it's a real honest response to what they're sharing with me. And I think that in that way, when I know that I'm keeping my stuff in check, and listen, it's hard. It is very, very hard. That when we can connect with them emotionally and respond to them honestly with them in those tender moments, that I think is part of
the healing.
Yes. And part of the way that they find their wellness, right? Through us really showing our own connection to them in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the laughing thing, I love laughter. And I have prescribed laughter to people. Like, I want you to watch something, listen to something, do something that makes you laugh every day. Right. And in Kundalini Yoga, there are some kriyas, or let's say recipes, which are like routines of things that we do. Sometimes laughing is a piece of it, because when we're doing really good belly laughing, like kind of, really engaging, we are doing great work with our vagus nerve. So, so laughing is even prescriptive as a way to increase vagal tone, so that you can kind of pop in and out of fight or flight and back into parasympathetic nervous system with a sense of ease. So if you think about it, the more we laugh, the easier it can be to recuperate from something that can kind of, light us up in a fight or flight way.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't thought about laughter in that context, but for sure. Mm-hmm. Next one is another one of my favorite questions. How do you define holding space for someone?
Well, I know we're on audio, but I know you can see me, but you can't really see me, all of me, but I'm putting my arms out. So when I think of holding space for someone, I really think of holding them, like holding their experiences, their tenderness, their individual aspects of them that they've shared with me that I've really gotten to know. Just, I think about holding all of them in a container that's safe and warm and trusting, right? And so that's how I view it in that way. And I even think of holding space as also joining in whatever they're bringing together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that question, because we all use different words, but we're all describing the same thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's an interesting question. I love it. What is the best advice you've ever received from a supervisor?
Oh, lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff. I wouldn't even know where to start. Right. Well, I had a supervisor that was with me when I was a student, and then stayed with her. Her name is Susan Fitchick Johnson. She is a sound. She's in Sacred Sound ATX, I think is her handle. But all along, she has just helped me to really do a lot of work with attachment and mindfulness. But she's given me phrases that I often use, like with clients. The phrases like, so when you notice that you're doing this thing, we can have this language, she would say, of that thing you do. It's just that thing you do. It's that place you go. So I think she really helped me with a lot of language and helping clients see certain things, and really bringing attention to that in this attachment work that we do, that when we kind of go, I really didn't get some of the, let's say, acknowledgement or validation of what I was experiencing from my parents or from my mom or my dad. She really helped me to see that, we've got some mourning to do, right? That you didn't get some of the parenting that you needed. And this is not to blame the parents at all. This is just for you to be present with, you really needed a little bit more than what you got. And I'm just feeling for that 8-year-old that fell off their bike, and my mom didn't notice that you had a big bad cut on your leg. Right. Yeah. So it just is really, I think those are just only two of the little pearls I got from Susan, a whole lot more.
Cool. Next one is a big question. What have you personally learned about yourself and or the world through your practice?
Well, um, I learned that people are suffering. Pretty much everybody is suffering on some level or another. But also, if I don't, I'm not a Buddhist, but there is some aspects of Buddhism that make sense to me. But right, didn't the Buddha say like being human is suffering? That's just that's what we're here. But I think really seeing all the different shades of it, I wasn't maybe prepared for seeing as much suffering as I have because it looks so different on everyone. And really just looking at the world through that lens, right? We're so divided. There's so much anger. And I'm like, oh gosh, there's so much suffering, just so much powerlessness, perhaps, right? You know, a few in power and an awful lot without power. So yeah, that's what I've learned and seen.
Some pretty heavy stuff.
Heavy duty. Thank goodness. Thank goodness for mindfulness, right? Right here, right now. I'm like, right here, right now. I'm okay. I'm talking with Noah. I'm all right. The sky is blue. I'm hoping to get to Barton Springs pretty soon. Right. But outside of that, like you can have those moments to where it's pretty dark and awful out there. But right here, right now, I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, we know you like to go to Barton Springs and read. What else do you do to take care of yourself?
Oh gosh, I do an awful lot. It's exhausting when I think about what I do. A lot about what I do has to do with, like what I said, caring for my very degenerated spine. So I do an awful lot of physical therapy, and I have to do acupuncture pretty frequently. And I have an infrared sauna in my house, really good to detox from mold.
That's amazing.
It is, right? And I have an elliptical in my home. I used to go to the gym, but now with COVID, I have it here. So there's lots of things that I do. I have, of course, walking is really important to me, moving my body too, and taking out my dogs. But, you know, that cooking thing, like when COVID hit and people are like, you know, where do I get my food? It didn't affect me, because I prepared probably even more than 90% of what I eat is what I do. So it keeps me really busy taking care of myself. I used to try to take holidays at least once or twice a year, like places where I can chill, but, you know, COVID and some family stuff has impacted that over the years. So I know I am overdue.
Yeah.
Or, you know, a couple weeks on a beach somewhere.
I hear that. How would you define happiness?
Well, to me, the happiness is elusive. And I guess there were times when I was younger that maybe being happy was important to me. And I don't find that I'm looking for happiness or even labeling what I'm experiencing as happiness. I'm more like, I've got some ease today, like really just settling into the present moment and noticing little things around me, whether they're little sounds from the birds outside that I like to hang out with when I meditate in the morning, or little things that my dogs do, or something really like artsy that really just touches me. I look for joy, perhaps. And if I can have a few moments of joy spread out throughout the other day, I'm thrilled. So maybe that's happiness to me, is having a day that had a bunch of joyful things happen, or that I experienced, or that I let in. That maybe to me is, I guess that means I'm happy.
Okay. Next questions, as if this entire interview hasn't been vulnerable, but but next questions are a little more vulnerable, perhaps. What is the most embarrassing moment you've had as a clinician?
That's that. That's a fun one. Yeah. I'm thinking back, and I'm trying to remember the time. And I'm pretty sure it was early 2019. But I had my mom had passed away right before, literally like 2 weeks before I had opened up my private practice. And so when I was first started in my private practice, I was going back and forth to North Carolina, hanging out with my dad. And later in the year, he started to get sick a little similarly to my mom. And so I was very preoccupied going back and forth. My sister even lived with him, but I found myself just really trying just too, let's say, wrapped up in what was happening with him. And then he got sick, and I was going back and forth an awful lot and seeing clients. And during this time when I was back and forth, I had a client come to see me and wanted to be in one of my groups. And when we do the group thing, I say they have to meet with me at least 3 times before they start in an established group. And by the second time that I had seen this client, I was calling her by the wrong name. I called her by the wrong client because it was a client that I was also seeing that was thinking about coming into group. And yeah, and she just looked at me and I just apologized. And I felt terrible. She ended up not staying with me, and I don't blame her, right? But I really wasn't very present, right? And I think that when you're self-employed, that and you know, it might have been better for me to not see people, but you know, you need to, and I did the best that I could to be the best therapist I could during. There was like 2 or 3 months that were hard.
Yeah, that's understandable. And it's hard because, you know, when we're struggling as a person, right? One of the things that sometimes helps us keep going and gaining momentum is continuing to work, you know? So I understand why.
Yeah, that's very true,
you
Noah.
would do that, you know?
Yeah, that was very, very true. I actually did some video sessions when I was in North Carolina, and I was so grateful to be like to have like, you know, sick, dying man in this room over here who happens to be my dad, who I adore. Right. And and I have clients in here. So I could just kind of close that away, pretend it wasn't, you know, I was just someplace else, and really, you know, get into it with the client. It was a very good thing for me to do, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Next question. Are you in therapy, or have you ever been in therapy?
Yes and yes.
Good deal.
Was in therapy 100 years ago. Even before, you know, even before September 11th. And so, yeah, I did some good therapy, you know, a long time ago. But now that I'm in therapy and really doing this attachment work, like I'm like, oh, goodness, if I had done that attachment work like so long ago, things may be different. Things may be different right now. So I say this to clients, like I was in therapy probably for, gosh, if I think about September, probably for 13 years, you know, not the entire time for 13 years, but we didn't do any attachment. And then you go now and we do this work, and I'm like, it's gone on pretty quickly. So I say that things with my clients, saying, as much as I'd love for you to be with me for years and years and years, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job right if you were here for that long. So when we bring this attachment stuff in, hopefully you won't be with me that long.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you think would be good for a potential client or other therapists to know about you and or your practice?
I think that maybe what I want people to know is that I'm just not only about the gut or the brain, right? And that I do understand that that sometimes that food thing can mean an awful lot of different things for people. And then I just want people to know that even though it says like psychotherapy and nutrition in Flourish's name, that doesn't mean that everybody that comes to us has to be about nutrition. It also doesn't mean that everybody that comes to us has to be about therapy. Right. That we have both of these modalities, or let's say perspectives, to work with a client, and it is all about where the client wants to be, what they're open to, what they're not, and we will do what's best for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Cyndi. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Noah. Appreciate it. Take care.
The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
Thank you for listening to NextQuest Podcast. I learned something new today, and I hope you did too. Stay tuned for our episode next week featuring Nichole Hart, licensed professional counselor and certified Imago relationship therapist, who will be talking about her practice in an area of specialty, Imago Therapy. NextQuest Podcast is sponsored by Jan Dimmitt Resources. Save yourself the time and stress of credentialing and let the experts at Jan Dimmitt Resources do what they do best. For over 20 years, Jan Dimmitt Resources has provided administrative support and credentialing services to mental health professionals in Texas and beyond. Visit their website at jandimmitt.com. That is JANDIMMITT.com, or call 512-731-5725 for more information on all the ways they can make running your practice easier for you. NextQuest Podcasts relies solely on donations to keep this project going. Please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/NextQuest or you can make a one-time donation on my website at www.nextquestcounseling.com/about-NextQuest-podcast. You can also support the podcast by liking our Facebook page. Until next question, this is Noah Garcia signing off.